Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to our viewers throughout the world on TorahAnytime.com. I'd like to address the Hashkofoh and Halacha of the pandemic that unfortunately is going on. Unfortunately, there's a preponderance of information of conspiracy theories that blames the Jews for the coronavirus, which is, of course, there's nothing new about that. In the time of the bubonic plague, which was otherwise known as the Black Plague in the 14th century, which decimated over 100 million people and between 30 and 60% of the European population. So there was a prevalence, obviously, of death, but there was one demographic, there was one group that really wasn't as affected as everybody else, as adversely, and as everybody didn't suffer the detriment of everybody else. And who was that? The Jews. So of course, the Gentiles, and particularly the Christians, they blamed the Jews for the bubonic plague. And a lot of anti-Semitism came as a result, and there were pogroms and terrible destruction that ensued. Now, the reason why the Jews weren't affected is not because they concocted the bubonic plague in some laboratory. First of all, I don't think anybody was that sophisticated scientifically, to be able to create a microbe or a microorganism, some of this kind of virus infection. The reason why the Jews weren't infected is because the Jews, Baruch Hashem, first of all, in medieval times, which coincided with the bubonic plague, most of the people in the world were, especially in Europe, were illiterate. The only ones that were basically 100% literacy rate, maybe aside from some women, were the Jews. The Jews were always literate. The Torah tells us that it's incumbent upon us. One of the moral mandates of the Jewish person is to educate your children, to grow up. Your children are not primates, they're not animals. Right? We're sophisticated. We are Tzelem Elokim, we're God's image. And there's a mitzvah for us to be educated in the values. And the only way you can be educated in moral values and precepts is if you can learn the Torah, you can study the Torah. You can learn Torah Shebal Peh, Torah Sheb'Ksav. So therefore we have a chiyuv to learn the Torah. The only way you can learn the Torah is if you know how to read. So what was raging in the medieval times, that people were mamash pashut, just unlettered and illiterate and ignoramuses, you didn't have that amongst the Jewish people. In addition, the Jewish people were always hygienic and sanitary. We have the mitzvah mikvah, which was certainly for women, very often for men also, and washing, hand washing. Just the fact that a person is Tzelem Elokim, the fact that the body houses the soul, and that a person has to make an impression upon the world, and a person should not be slovenly, a person shouldn't be in any way look like a vagabond or look, like a hermit or recluse. A person should look like a miyuchas, a person should look like he comes from lineage, a person should look like distinguished, a person should look exceptional and unique. A person should know that he should take care of his body and not in any way be an impediment, or obstacle to others. And therefore, hygiene was always paramount amongst the Jewish people, and that's why, because they had sanitary conditions, that's why the bubonic plague didn't hit them as much as it hit. Obviously, it did hit them, and Jews were killed by the bubonic plague, but it didn't hit them as much as it hit general society. So that's something very important to remember. The hygiene is a very cardinal rule here. That the more, hopefully, you're vigilant about hygiene, hopefully, that it should help in arresting and in preventing the spread, the proliferation of this virus. Now, how should a Jew react? But there are klal in regards to these things. So there's a Beferish Ramah in Shulchan Aruch Yoreh Deah. The Ramah says, Dever Be'ir, that there's a plague, there's a virus, so to speak, in a city. The person should run away. A person should abandon ship. A person should leave. A person should flee. Which we'll see is very hard to reconcile this Ramah with another Ramah in the Tshuvas. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's in the Tshuvas Ramah Chaf, although some versions of Ramah have it in Yud Ches, Yud Tes 18 or 19. We'll see that it's very, very hard for the Ramah to explain the Ramah. But as a matter of fact, there's a Shlal Kadosh. And the Shlal Kadosh says that if there is a family that has children that contract the virus, and the parents keep the children in the city and don't pack up and leave, therefore exposing other children to this virulence, to the virus, then the parents have blood on their hands. That's a terrible thing. So if a person knows that they're carrying the virus, a person knows that they have a chance of affecting others, and a person doesn't quarantine and exposes himself or herself to others, it's a terrible thing. You're not allowed to stand by the blood of your brothers. Now, even though Baruch Hashem a million times, this virus, there is a lot of drama. and there's a lot of hyperbole, exaggeration associated with it, because most people statistically that will get the virus, Baruch Hashem, will recover, will recuperate. Many people will have mild symptoms. It won't be more than a flu, and it won't even be more than a cold for many, many people, Baruch Hashem. But there's a chance. Now, we don't know how it's a novel corona. Even though corona's been around for who knows how many years. It's a novel virus that the human being, it's been around in animals, and that's why, that's how it actually proliferated. It came from China. The same way, by the way, the Jews didn't make the bubonic plague. It came from China also, in the 14th century. So you see that the Jews have a very strong relation, even before they started eating Chinese food. And it became, a favorite pastime of the Jewish people where, today it's sushi, I can't live without. It used to be that a Jewish simcha couldn't be without Chinese food, all right? So you see that there's a strong correlation. They blame the Jews instead of blaming the Chinese. It was a Chinese problem, it wasn't the Jewish problem. Okay, but this is the Metzias, this is what happened. The fact is that most people, Baruch Hashem, will not. But since we don't know how it adheres to the immune system and how the immune compromised people or elderly people or weak people with weak constitutions and weak physiology, how it can impact them and how it can even impact a regular person. Because you never know the person's metabolism, you never know the person's constitution, you never know the person's physiology, and therefore it is a sakana. It's a veritable sakana, and something we should all be very nizar. So I'd like to now reference the Gemara. The Gemara in Baba Kama, which speaks about Hezek, which speaks about damage. The Gemara in Baba Kama, Daf Samacham Beis. It's a Beferish Gemara. Tan Rabbanim, the Rabbanim taught, Dever Be'ir, if there's a plague in the city, a pestilence, a virus, something that is contagious, something that is communicative, something that other people can catch. Gemara says, Kanas Raglecha, which means gather your feet, means leave, don't stick around. Which seems to indicate that even if a person is a very holy person, and even if a person has a lot of emunah, still, it's incumbent upon the person to follow normal protocol, naturalistic approach, and to leave, and not to be falazich, not to be saimech, not to rely upon any shmira, any, let's say, shomer p'sam Hashem, that the Rebbeinu Shalom watches over the foolish or the silly people. So the Gemara says further, it speaks about this, and it says, and it references a pasuk. The Gemara says that Rava, it's machlokes, the Girsov, it's Rava, but most Rishonim say it's Rava, Be'idon Rischa, in a time of judgment, and this is certainly a time of judgment. The Gemara says, but Farish as well over here, the Gemara says that when it comes to a time of judgment, it comes to a plague or a virus, the Rebbeinu Shalom is not mavchen bein tzedakah and risham. The Rebbeinu Shalom does not necessarily distinguish between the good and the bad, between the righteous people and evil people. The righteous people are grouped up with the evil people together. And therefore, it doesn't discriminate. Virus doesn't discriminate. Imagine something that is so small, that is so minuscule. It's not visible to the naked eye. It's micro. It's tiny, and yet it's wreaking so much havoc. The most technologically advanced society to ever live. And we have all the defenses, we have all the mechanisms, we have all the armaments, we have nuclear capability, we have nanotechnology, we have everything, and yet we are totally defenseless, where the entire Bria almost, the entire world is on the verge of almost shutting down. I mean, it shows you, the Rebbeinu Shalom shows you that I could use anything. That don't think that you're on top of the world, and don't think that, Gaiva is the root of all evil, the Orcha Siddiqim says. The arrogance, where a person says, look what I've accomplished. The Baruch says, I could stop everything with something that you have no cure to. They have no answer for. And this is really, you see the Geula coming, the impending Geula, you see Mashiach, because the time of Mashiach, the people, the way that Mashiach will come, we have to become so vulnerable, so susceptible, so defenseless, where there's nothing to rely upon. You can't even call 911. Remember, by 9/11, I tried to call 911. There was an emergency going. You called 911, it was a busy tone. You couldn't reach them. Ein lanu shine. Really, Mashiach maybe should have come in 2001. We weren't zeicha. We didn't do enough tshuva. Maybe Mashiach should have come in the time of the Holocaust. We weren't zeicha. Maybe by the 6-Day War, 1967. We weren't zeicha. What's going to be now? No one has experienced this. Most people were not around the Spanish influenza in 1918. Most people, the swine flu or SARS or any of these other, pandemics, they weren't as the scope of what we're seeing now. This is monumental. This is mamash epic. This is colossal. This is mamash unparalleled in our lifetimes. And the shaila is, are we going to take the sign? Are we going to take the sign and we're going to wake up and do tshuva and say, there's something over here that is inexplicable. There's something over here that has no biur. There's something over here that has no svara. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. Or are we going to go on with our normal lives? So what's going to be? So the Gemara speaks about Rava. The Gemara says, "Either Rischa in the time of judgment, where there was a plague, he went ahead and the Rashi touches up. It means that he went ahead and he saw some chaloinas. He closed his windows. He was afraid of the Rava, the great Rava. He was afraid. Yeah, he was afraid. He said because again, when there's a virus, it doesn't discriminate, and therefore he closed up his windows out of fear of danger that he shouldn't get the plague, that he shouldn't get the virus." The Gemara says further, a person should not walk in the middle of the road. Why should you not walk in the road? Because in such a time, the Malcham Avos is wanton destruction, is indiscriminate. The Malcham Avos has total jurisdiction, and therefore you should go and you should hide from the Malcham Avos. Walk on the side of the road, clandestinely. Go ahead and be unobtrusive, be inconspicuous in a time like this. The Kivin Dihavili Rishus, since Malcham Avos now has time to destroy, Mazgal Hadya. The Gemara says you have to be very, very careful. That's just time. We have to make every precaution. It even says, "Dever bir you can't send me a person shouldn't go into the shul alone without a minion. Only if there's a minion there should you go into the shul." Many, many different instructions over here about Dever bir. I want you to know that Rabbi Yitzchok, when he fought very valiantly, anybody know which disease it was that he was in his time? I'll give you what? Cholera. Yeah, cholera. Yeah. It was in 1830. Rabbi Yitzchok went ahead and he told everybody, and Rabbi said, we said this before. I mentioned it. I don't know how many people in Israel in this, but to say Pitam Aktoris twice a day. There's Rabbi Yitzchok. He gave a charge. He said that Ketoris is Megan, but Ketoris protects. Ketoris can render immune and impervious to a plague, to a virus, to something communicative, something contagious. It's so kedai. The Sifrei Kabbalah bring down the Ketoris, the incense offering, these ingredients have a special ability to render a person immune, and therefore twice a day, the emissaries that we say in Karbanis. How many people say Ketoris in Karbanis? It's much more lengthy in Ketoris, in Karbanis. But also the Sfarim say it, the Hasidim say it every single day after davening before Aleinu. The reason why we don't say it, Ashkenazim, the reason why Ashkenazim don't say it is because there's a fear that since a person is very, very distracted during the day, during the weekday, because he's Isaac b'malacha, because he's a orangutan, he has to work, and he's always on the run, and he's always on the go. We're afraid that if you say Ketoris, you misconstrue it, the Chas v'Shalom, if you bring the wrong ingredient in Ketoris, it's brought down, that it's Misa, a person would die. So therefore, it became the Kabbalah, it became tradition not to say Ketoris during the week, only on Shabbos Yom Tov when a person has more ability to have Munuchas Adas, and the person has less daigas, less worry, and he could actually say it. Other poskim say that no, you don't have to worry. That's only when you actually brought the ingredients. But enumerating it and reciting it, and it's only in the base of Mikdash itself, it doesn't apply. It's not regay, it's not applicable, and therefore you don't have to worry. You should obviously try to focus and concentrate as much as possible, and have fervor and say it with concentration. But stamazai, even regularly, you could say it without being feared that Chas v'Shalom you're going to be put to death by saying it out of order, or by misinterpreting, misconstruing, or saying the wrong order. Therefore, we say Pitim Aktoris, it's Kedai to say it twice a day to give you Shmira. Even though we say that the Malcham Avos don't discriminate when it comes to time of Bayer, and there were Chashav Rabbanim, unfortunately, that were afflicted with the coronavirus already. And Chashav, not to think that there's anything bad with them. The Gemara says Beferish that Rabban Shalom is not Mavchin, he doesn't discriminate, he doesn't distinguish between Tzaddikim and Rishon when it comes to Dever Be'ir, when it comes to such a thing. Another thing to have said many times, countless times I think I said, say the Shir Shel Begoim. Chazal call it the Shir Shel Begoim, the song of Begoim, of Chas v'Shalom, of disease or affliction. It spares you. Yoishib Yisayser Kel Yoin. It's in Sadik Aleph 91. It's also called the Mizmor, the Shir Shel Bracha. The Torah calls it the Shir Shel Bracha. It gives you bracha. It gives you blessing. Say it 10 times a day if you have to. Say if you have your children in mind, have your families in mind, have your neighbors in mind, have all kinds of Klal Yisrael, all the children of Israel in mind, have everybody in mind. Say 91 Yoshev Eser. It says L'sunei lecha barak nega. It speaks about all the afflictions and diseases and suffering. It spares you. Very, very important. Now, I want to share with you the Gemara in Ksuvas Daf Ayin Zayin Base. Very, very kedai to learn this Gemara. Gemara tells us of a plague which is called Rasun. Very interesting. It's very little eerie because many of the symptoms that the Gemara describes are very similar to coronavirus. Although there's a little bit of a dispute about the coronavirus, what the true symptoms are. Hopefully, we pray to Hashem that it's not an airborne virus. Although there's machlokes about that too, but it seems it's not airborne at all, just surfaces. But the Gemara says here that when it speaks about a communicative, a contagious illness, it says Reb Zera lehava yasa bezike. Reb Zera would not sit bezike, which means lechara. It means in the wind. It means that he would not subject himself. He would not expose himself to anybody, to the environment of anybody that had any exposure or that contracted any type of the virus. Reb Elazar would refuse to go into the home of somebody that had the illness. Rav Ami Rav Asi, lahavi ochli mibei dahu mibar. They would not even eat an egg that was sold in the marketplace where there was an illness. They would not eat from the food, because they're afraid of contaminant. They're afraid of this contagious, and that's why a person should be careful and take out takeout food. All these things, hope and pray that they're using sanitary conditions and take every necessary precaution. But that's Rav Ami Rav Asi. But listen to the Gemara further. A moiridik Gemara, an awesome Gemara. Hafli v'fel. Listen to this Gavaldige Gemara. Rabbi Shua Levi michrich behu. However, Rabbi Shua Levi took the opposite approach. He took the opposite approach, the metric opposition to Reb Zera and to Rav Ami Rav Asi and to Rabbi Elazar, as well as Rabbi Yochanan as well. What did Rabbi Yehoshua Balevi? He dafka went ahead and michruch. He conjoined himself. He put himself in the company of people that were sick. You hear this? Maridik. Why? Vasim Torah, he taught them Torah. He learned Torah with them. Why? Because he said, Ayala Sahuva Miyalas Chain Imchain, the pasuk from Mishlei, Imchain Milo Al Lumida Agudala Migna. So he says that of course Torah protects. The Torah is the biggest shmira. Torah is the best of schara, Torah is the best thing in the world, and also Torah is making, Torah protects. He says, and therefore he's not afraid of chas v'shalom, anything contagious, he's not afraid of getting the illness at all. You hear this? This is Rabbi Shua Levi. So, Frank Rabbi Chanan, in the Kaibet Shurim, Chanan Wasserman, Hashem Yimkim Dam, Hashem should avenge his blood, which is cruelly, he was murdered by the Nazis. He could have saved himself for Boisai. He was in America. And they told him, don't go back to Europe, don't go back to Poland, to Branovich. You could save your life. And he was Moise Nefesh, Ashala Halacha, if he's allowed to do that or not. He says, my Talmidim, he says, my children, I love my students like my own children. I can't abandon them. And he went back. And they told him to dig his own ditch. They shot him mercilessly in cold blood. That's Rabbi Chanan. So Rabbi Chanan asks Akash, he says, what do you mean? Do we have a klal? The Gemara Psachim says in Daf Chesam Beis, a famous Gemara, but very bavusta Gemara. Everybody knows Shchicha Zeka, the Makom Shchicha Zeka, a place where there's prevalence. Again, I'm just going to reiterate: if anybody is sick, please. I don't mean to offend anybody, but if anybody is sick, please, it's not allowed to be in here. We don't want to get anybody else sick. Okay. Now, the Gemara says in Psachim Daf Chesam Beis, the Gemara says that if there's b'makom shechicha hezeka, in a place where hezek is rampant, normally we say shluchei mitzvah in a zokan, that if you're doing a mitzvah, if you're an emissary or an agent or an ambassador to do a mitzvah, and a messenger to do a mitzvah, then you won't get harmed. However, if you're going to drive by Harlem 1 o'clock in the morning, I don't know if it's still a dangerous neighborhood or not. I don't know. The regentrification. It used to be Bed-Stuy, it was a crazy neighborhood. Now it's the most expensive neighborhood in America, I think. Okay, but if you drive by one of these dangerous neighborhoods at 1 o'clock in the morning because you're delivering Brownsville. If you're going to drive because you're delivering to your grandmother medicine and you have your windows open and somebody throws something, a cocktail into your thing, and so Makom Shchicha Zeka, Rabbi Sai, you can't say if Hezek is Shchiach, right? It's not going to work. If you decide that you're going on a special mission to save the Jews from Iran, and you walk into Iran, and by the way, we know that Iran is one of the most heaviest hit places from the virus of all the places in the world. They have I think, if not, one of the most, or the most casualties from this virus. As a matter of fact, they're digging trenches. They're making mass graveyards because they have so many. And you won't believe it. One of the clerics over there was 93 years old. It's considered to be like, second to Khamenei or something there. So they asked him, they said, there's a vaccine supposedly that Israel is developing. But they're not allowed. They have an embargo. They have an embargo. Everything for Eretz Yisrael is blacklisted. Will you accept it? He says, b'diavad, we'll have to come up with a heter. He said, he said very reluctantly, if there's no, it's a shasatchak gadol harasha. Imagine, I'm telling you this. He didn't use all the Shoshanas, those language. But this is what he said. He said, okay, if we have to, fine, they're willing to take something from Israel. But listen, and maybe the Rebbe Shalom's planned. I said on Shal Shudas, and maybe the Rebbe Shalom's planned that he's eradicating the enemies in Iran and causing such havoc over there and wreaking such chaos. Maybe because they were plotting. The emissaries, right before this coronavirus broke out, then they announced that they have the bomb, Kamat. And they're going to destroy Eretz Yisrael. And now there's pandemonium there. They can't do anything. They're mamish they're like debilitated. They're crippled. You never know. You never. Hallelujah Hashem Kol Goyim. Who is praising Rabbi Shalom? It doesn't say the Yidden are praising Rabbi Shalom every day. Shabchu Kol. Who is enthusing about the Rabbi Shalom? Not the Yidden. Says the Maral. Why say the Goyim? Maral says because the Goyim know what they're conniving. The Goyim know what they're plotting and conspiring every single day. And they see the Yeshua's Hashem. They say, 1 second, we were just building a bomb. And all of a sudden, some virus came in, and therefore the Goyim, they say, ooh, this Rabbi Shalom, he really protects his people. We don't even know. We don't know what happens. This is all happening so surreptitiously, clandestinely. We don't even know what's happening, Rabbi Sai. The Goyim know. They're bringing the Yeshua. Okay, so, they're seeing the Yeshua. And yeah, so Rabbi Chanan says, how's it shaykh? How's it shaykh? So Rabbi Chanan wants to say that if it's a Mokum Shechicha Azeka, that in a place where you have contagious people, how's Rabbi Shmuel Levi? How's he learning with them? So he says it could be therefore that Torah Megan is an exception to the rule of Shechicha Azeka. That if you have somebody like the personage of Rabbi Shmuel Levi, who's such a tzaddik atzum and so selfless, the Gemara says such amazing things with Rabbi Shmuel Levi that his Torah can be Megan, and it's an exception to the rule of Shechicha Azeka that when damage is dominant, that Shluchei Mitzvah could be damaged. That a person that's emissary for mitzvah could still be damaged. The Meshech Chochmah wants to say, there's a famous shmooze, a famous dissertation from the Meshech Chochmah, Rameir Simcha Devinsk, who, by the way, he was a prophet of his time. He said, he saw what was happening in Germany. He said the Jews were assimilating left and right. There wasn't kiruv. Rabbi said before the Holocaust, 2/3, and when I was in yeshiva as a kid, they used to sell us this fairy tale that everybody in Europe and Poland was frum, and Rabbi said it was a fable, it was a myth. 2/3, almost 70% of the Yidden in Poland gave up Shabbos entirely, had no shaykhs to Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbeinu Shalom says, this is how my people are behaving? I'm going to let them be at the mercy of the nations. That's it. That's what happens. And can you imagine if there would have been kiruv in the 1930s? Rabbi Yisrael Salant, who we'll speak about later, he tried. He was a hero. He went ahead, he went to college, he dressed up. Can you imagine a Gadol Hadar? Can you imagine Chaim Kanievsky go ahead and dressing up like a modern person? He dressed up like he took on the Western clothing. They probably said he's a kaifer. Little did they know that he was trying to save, it was Pikuach Nefesh. And he went to college campuses, he went on the street. He took Gemaras, he tried to translate it to German, because he saw the writing on it. So without kiruv, without kroivim, rechaikim, as the Megillah Esther says, he uses the word, that's where you find kroivim, rechaikim, right? BJX's motto, we do kroivim and rechaikim, right? Comes from Megillah Esther, that's where it comes from. He saw the writing on the wall, Rav Shosland. He said, if we don't do kiruv, he says, Gans Klal Yisrael, Hashem is in jeopardy, in peril. 1 out of every 3 Jews was killed by the Nazis. By the most sophisticated, cultured, educated people to ever live on earth. The Germans had all the finesse and culture, they had all the etiquette, they had all the sophistication. They weren't barbarians, they weren't savages, they weren't Neanderthals. And look what happened. Terrible, terrible. So the Meshech Chochmah said, I fear, this is what he said, I fear that those that declare, because they declared Germany the new Yerushalayim, he said, I fear what's going to happen to all the Jews. And he knew, he said exactly what's going to happen. He said exactly. The Meshech Chochmah says, that Yeshua ben Levi was Mamalam and Teva. He surpassed Teva nature, and therefore he was immune. He didn't have to worry about anything contagious, because his Torah was so l'shem shemayim. Torah l'shem shemayim. Torah for the sake of heaven. Rabbi said it's a Gemara, Beferish Gemara, in Bab Metzia Daf Peyam and Beis. The Gemara says that if you learn Torah with the son of an Amoret, somebody who doesn't have Torah in their house, somebody whose father never taught them Torah, then and that's why you get a bracha. Go to like Rav Grossman from Migdal. What's it called in Eretz Yisrael? Huh? Migdal Emek, right? He does so much kiruv, amazing kiruv, right? You go to like Rav Noch Weinberg, ask them for a bracha. The Gemara says that even if there's a gezerah, they can be mevatel. Can you imagine that? Because they're teaching Torah l'shma. There's no agenda. They're teaching people Torah that never had Torah in their lives. Never had Torah in their lives. So that's the Meshech Chacham. Now, the emissaries in the time of Rabbi Yitzchok, when you had the bubonic plague. I'm sorry, you had the cholera. So he actually, Rabbi Yitzchok was famous for making edicts, for making takanas in Posen. He was a Rav of Posen. And he was an of Adma'od. He was a tremendous, the paragon of humility. So to the extent that when he became the father-in-law, the Shver of the Chasam Sofer, Ramosha Sofer of Pressburg, so Ramosha Sofer wrote that I'd be very happy to entertain a shidduch with your daughter, Bas Talmid Chacham. So he said, everything you write about my daughter is true. He said, what you write about me is not true. I'm not a Talmud. She's not a. What you write about the fact that she's a daughter of Talmid Chacham, it's not true. I wish I was a Talmid Chacham. Imagine the Gadol Hador writing this, right? The Gadol, they say, was mamish selfless, who'd do anything for anybody. They say that there's a story that he had a cousin, I don't know if it was a distant cousin, he once went traveling in a town, and he was on official business for Klal Yisrael, and nobody knew where he disappeared. They said, where's Rabbi Yitzchok? And he had to say, they discovered that the guy wasn't even from, I don't think. He said, Mibsarcha al tesalim, loy tesalim, that from your flesh. He says that sometimes the Talmid Chacham is allowed to go ahead and avert his eyes. When it comes to a mitzvah, right, if it's a lost object, he doesn't have to pick it up. He says, but when it comes, loy suchul tesalim, there's no, the Navi Yishai says, when it comes to your flesh, you can't avert your eyes. It never says you could avert your eyes. He says, therefore, when it comes to your flesh and blood, you have to take care of family, and you have to treat family as best as possible. And you try to be makar with them as much as possible. It's so important to take care. And of course, we're all family. Klal Yisrael has to take care of one another. We shouldn't rely upon social services. We shouldn't rely upon government agencies. If we know somebody in need, if it's a neighbor, if it's somebody in the community, somebody, wherever it is, we should always make sure to take care. Otherwise, Chasham, it's a chil Hashem. So Rabbi Yitzchok, he went ahead, and during this cholera breakout, he made certain takanas. He said that you're not allowed to have davening in a shul. Very interesting. He said you should daven outdoors. And he said that the minyan should not be more than 15 people. Not more than 15 people should congregate. And he was a pioneer of social distancing. He said everybody should stay in their own Dalet Amos. They should stay separate and apart from each other. They should be staggered. He says, you should have people staggered, not sitting close to one another. Should be a distance, I don't know, remember exactly. It was 4 feet, 6 feet, away from one another. This is Rabbi Yitzchok. As a matter of fact, he was able to circumvent. He was able to arrest. He was able to stop the proliferation and the rampancy of the cholera to such a degree within his community that King Frederick of Prussia actually made a royal proclamation and delivered. I think that it's still extant. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's still surviving. It's still around. Somebody has it. There's a certificate from the royal king declaring they went to now. This may be a legend. I don't know if it's 100% true, but there's a makar for this that they actually went to deliver the certificate from the king to his house, and when they went there, they saw a whole bunch of stamps, postage stamps, that were torn up in a bowl. And the courier, who was representing the king, he said, "What's this so strange? It's a real oddity. Why do you have these stamps?" He says, "You know why?" He says, "Because he got shalos chuvas from around the world. People asking him shilas, and he used to send sometimes couriers, let's say his talmidim, his students, or his congregants, his balabatim, to go ahead and to deliver it. But he felt that at that time that he was depriving Prussia, he was depriving the economy and the royalty of the postage stamps. Anytime he would go ahead and deliver a letter with one of his talmidim or balabatim, he would take a stamp and he would purchase a stamp and then tear it up." They said they never saw such a thing. Never saw such a thing. Can you imagine? This is Rabbi Yitzchok. I mean, obviously, not too many people on that madrega, but to Rabbi Yitzchok, in his time, Baruch Hashem, he staved off, and he was able to, because of the hygiene, sanitary conditions, and also because of the social distancing that he promulgated in his environs, he was able to stop a lot of people from having the disease. And he did this Yom V'Loila. Instead of learning, he closed the sefer and he went around making sure that everybody was healthy and safe, but to the best of his ability. Now the emes is that there's a lot of legend, again, about what he did for Yom Kippur during Clara, during the outbreak. But we're not 100% certain, but there are those that say, I think that for Rosh Hashanah at least, he had very interesting enactments and decrees as far as the davening, what time it should start, how lengthy it should be, because he's afraid that people would have too much of an ordeal, that it would be too difficult on their systems, and therefore there are takanas that were made. What's fascinating is that later on in history, a few decades later, with Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, so there was also Clara. Clara lasted for several decades, if I'm not mistaken, around 40 years or so. And Rabbi Yisrael Salant got up, if I'm not mistaken, around...
And all these takanas were enacted for 40 years?
I don't know. I don't know if it was, if it was that severe, if it was less severe. I'm not 100% certain. But Rabbi Yisrael Salant, there is a tradition that he got up in shul on Yom Kippur, and he said, Rabbi Yisai, he said, there are stations. He constructed food stations in the courtyard of the shul where he had food for people to break their fast. He said because he was afraid that if people are hungry, then their immunity could be compromised, even healthy people, and because immunity is compromised, they could be more susceptible to contracting the illness. Now in Halacha, there was a huge machlokes about this amongst the Achronim, a huge tumult, a huge controversy. Because if you have an imminent danger, something mamash biyadayim, you have something at hand, so you'll say, okay, this pikuach nefesh, you have to eat because somebody's sick and somebody's going to get sick. But to say that by not eating, it sounds like a grama, it sounds like it's indirect. By not eating, you're going to go ahead and lower your immune system and therefore be susceptible and more vulnerable to a disease. That sounds a little far-fetched. But this was the psak of Rosh Salant. Most people know him as the greatest Baal Musar of his time, as the greatest man that disseminated ethical discourse and taught us how to be mentioned. But little did they know, he was also a big paisik. Rabbi Yisrael Salant was a big paisik. And so Rabbi Yisrael Salant made an announcement, and some say that he even got up, he stood at the bima, the Rav got up, Rabbi Yisrael Salant got up, and he said, Rabbi Yisrael, I'm now making Kiddush, because I want you all to know that this is the derech hayasher, this is the right thing to do, that nobody should be bashful, and nobody should be apprehensive and think that if they're not feeling well, if they think that they may be in peril, and therefore he decided he's going to become the role model, he's going to become the exemplar, he's going to become the example, and he's made Kiddush and ate less than the shear. He ate less than the shear on Yom Kippurim in order to set the right example so that people should watch out and be as cautious and vigilant as possible to protect their health. And Nishmartem Ma'od, very, very few times the Torah is renowned for being terse and for being very exceedingly known for its brevity. And yet the Torah says, be careful for your health. It says, be very careful. When it comes to health, we don't play games. Because if you're not healthy, you can't function as a yid. How are you supposed to do mitzvahs if you can't? It's impossible. Rabbi Moshe wants to be able to nishmartem ma'od. And so you mentioned that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, he made these takanas, he made fascinating takanas in order to try to keep people healthy. Now, the emes is that about visiting people in quarantine, halachically, visiting people in quarantine. If somebody's in quarantine and they ask you to come visit, or you want to do a big mitzvah, because a person could be lonely. Now people have these smartphones and everything. I'm not saying it's a good thing to have a smartphone, bad thing to have a smartphone. Obviously, that's a whole different discussion. But Baruch Hashem, the internet, does have a major saving grace, so to speak. Because now, people could have Torah anytime. They could have shiurim live streamed into there, and it's an amazing thing. Without the internet, none of this would be possible. People in Mamash would be desolate, devoid of any Torah, okay, you can't have a daven. You can't based on the Chacham Tzvi and based on other. Obviously the Chacham Tzvi, didn't write about the internet based on this Mishnah Berurah, but live streaming would not help for a minyan to have a Darvish Shabbat. Still, it wouldn't help. And even if you have 3D printing, and even if you have a hologram, it still wouldn't help to make a mamash a hologram. Like the person is physically three-dimensionally here, it still wouldn't help. For Darvish Shabbat, it wouldn't help. Yeah, right. Of course, yeah. Should daven together, right? But to be mechaber, it says the same time. To be mechaber at the same time. But as far as visiting somebody, so there's a fascinating Ramah. Ramah in the Chuvas in Siman Chaf in his Chuvas, Ramah. Now you have to see who the Ramah was. The Ramah was a tzaddik yisrael. He was the most righteous. The fact is, the Ramah was writing a Shulchan Aruch at the same time that Rabbi Yitzchok was writing a Shulchan Aruch in Sfas, and the Ramah decided, based on the Gemara says that if there's a lot of Torah already, so it says that sometimes a person should withdraw. Sometimes a person should know when to withdraw, and when a person's own aggrandizement, Hashem not an aggrandizement, say, but a person's own contribution is not necessary. And therefore, when the Shulchan Aruch, when he found out that that even though he spent his whole lifetime writing the Shulchan Aruch, he was very, very young when he passed away. He was barely 40 years old when he passed away. But you see how much he accomplished. The Torah, we never discriminated in age. If a person's a Talmud Chacham, it doesn't make a difference how old he is. He could be a young man. He's a Talmud Chacham, he's a Talmud Chacham, he's a Gadol. But the Ramah was writing the Shulchan Aruch, and he found out that Rabbi Yitzchok was also writing the Shulchan Aruch, and he was depressed, he was devastated. Even though he was a big Balamuni, he says, well, so what about? And then he said, you know what? If there's a Shulchan Aruch already, let him have let him shine. And he was Anav, and he withdrew. And all he did was write Hagah. He wrote a gloss. He wrote an addendum for Ashkenazim, for the Eastern European Jewry. And you see, that's why he was blessed. He became the biggest Paisik of his time. There's stories about him that he caused. I don't want to say, but he caused earthquakes. He gave curses. They mamish became true in front of the Olam, in front of everybody. Amazing, amazing stories about him. Ramosha Islis, and again, he was a very, very young man. Ramah writes that you could go visit somebody. The mitzvah bikkur cholim, the mitzvah of visiting the sick, applies even for a contagious illness. He says, because who are you to decide whether the person is going to get sick or not? You don't know. He says, the Rebbeinu Shalom's plan. This is the Rebbeinu Shalom's calculation. Only Rebbeinu Shalom could contrive, so to speak, whether a person is going to get sick or not. And by believing that you may get sick from somebody else, then you're undermining and underestimating the Rebbeinu Shalom, and it's a breach in faith. And you're not a mammon anymore. Because Rebbeinu Shalom is Meimus Mechayah. Only Rebbeinu Shalom gives life and death, and therefore you have nothing to worry about. If you're doing a mitzvah, he says, otherwise the mitzvah bikkur cholim become obsolete. This is what he says. The mitzvah bikkur cholim. Now, he's joined by the Marsham, and the Chesed Avram, Rav Zulai, also says this. As a matter of fact, the Chesed Avram goes much further, and he castigates anybody that thinks that Hashem, they could get sick from somebody else. Very, very extreme, the Chesed Avram. And that disease only comes from the Rebbeinu Shalom and from no one else, and the person that doesn't have to be worried at all. Now, the Rishbash, the famous Rishbash, actually, who Rabbi Akiva Eger, in the Gilyon HaShas, on Bava Kama Samach Mebez, the Gilyon HaShas, Rabbi Akiva Eger actually references this Rishbash, and it's the Rishbash is in Simon, it's the Rishbash is in Simin Kuf Sadikei 195. The Rabbi Akiva Eger cites it, and the Rishbash differs from the Ramah. Rishbash says that although everyone's decree was already enacted in Rosh Hashanah, and therefore a person should say, one second, if I'm supposed to die, I'm going to die anyway, right? Everybody, there's an old adage, refrain that in America, every bullet has its address, right? It was already preordained or designated. Is that a Jewish concept? According to Rishbash, it's not. He says because even though Rosh Hashanah was already orchestrated, so to speak, from heaven, whether you're going to live or die, he says there are yechidim. He says there's a whole Beinani aspect, there's a whole middle, there's a whole average, there's a whole statistic, there's a whole demographic, there's a whole epidemiologists, would call this, the anomalies. He said that actually some people have a gzeira that's hanging. And the gzeira was never made, it was never issued officially on Rosh Hashanah, it's hanging. He says, and therefore, if a person exposes himself and makes himself more vulnerable, then a person can actually catch something. So it doesn't mean that, and as a matter of fact, the Maharil, you hear this? Maharil says something which seems to be blasphemous. It seems to be something so like sacrilegious and irreverent. It sounds to be like kfirah. The Maharil says that you can't say every disease comes from God. He says, because if you hold that as an Eden Rischa, that there's a time of judgment, and the Rebbeinu Shalom is not maflim beit tzaddik l'rasha, the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't discriminate between tzaddik and rasha, not every disease comes from God. It could be that there's also natural causes sometimes, and therefore if you subject yourself, if you expose yourself to a virulence, you expose yourself to a virus, to a megefa, to a pandemic, then even if you're not supposed to die, but you rendered yourself, it's like the Rambam says in Marin Avaychim, the guide to the perplexed, and the Rambam says in Shemayin Prakim also, in the introduction to Avos, where he says that if you go ahead and you put yourself on a mountain, and there is a tornado or whatever it is, a hurricane, I don't know, something, when there's a major wind, it doesn't have to be even a wind, and you put yourself on the top of the mountain, and you say, 1 second, if I'm supposed to die, I'll die. If I'm not supposed to die, the Rebbeinu Shalom will let me die. He says he says it's absurd. He says Rebbeinu Shalom implanted laws of nature. There's gravity. And it says, and by you trying to defy that, you're going connected the Bria. You yourself is going connected the Bria. So therefore, a person should be very careful. Not every death should be attributed necessarily to the divine will. And therefore, it's a big machlokes between the Ramah, the Marsham, Chesed Avram, versus the Rishbash, and the Maril, and others, whether or not a person should expose himself to a contagious illness. Now, it could be the Ramah is talking about isolated cases, not where there is a pandemic. And if it's isolated cases, he feels that if you do the mitzvah Brikul Cholim, you'll have shmira, you'll have protection. However, if it's rife and rampant, and it's endemic to the society, to the town, person has to judge now whether it is a case of Dever Be'ir. Do we go according to a Miyut? Do we go according to Miyut She'ena Matzoi? Statistically, how we go when the Rebbe Gedolim were asked, Rebbe David Feitzer, Shmuel Konetsky, Rebbe Hershel Schachter, they were asked about this past Shabbos, whether the shul should open or close. They know Kol HaTorah Kula, and they have to go ahead and they have to make an assessment, they have to make an evaluation, they have to make an analysis whether this is considered to be a Dever Be'ir. How many people were affected? What are the chances of being affected? But I think that certainly in a pandemic, in a case situation where somebody's quarantined, it may be on the safe side. Suffolk, even though you have a suffix that chamur, we say chamur sakanta misura, that she's more chamur, she's more machmir, more stringent when it comes to a sakana, when it comes to a mortal danger than eating treif or eating chazir or eating, let's say, anything that is forbidden, chaylev or something. So a person should be more careful, but. Therefore, a person should stay away from someone who Hashem could be contagious. But we have to understand that this is mamish spectacular times we're living in, Rabbi Yitzchok. When the ikvus of the Mashiach, there's no doubt. There can't be any doubt. And we need shmir more than ever. But this is a time when we have to have shalom. We have to have peace. Shalom ben Adam lachavera, to go ahead and go above and beyond, to be mavir amid, as Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky issued in a letter. He said not to speak rechilas, don't talk about people in a negative way, because that brings you chasham kitrug, it brings you prosecution, and it makes you more vulnerable. And to be very, very careful, even if somebody offends you, just look the other way, be mavir amid doisav. Hanel lovim veinam aliv, shaymim charpos veinam ashivim, the right Chazal tell us. Pasuk says that if you listen, and even if you're admonished incorrectly, and even if you're castigated or slighted or impugned, don't make a big deal. Just have shalom. Let shalom reign in your families, in Klal Yisrael. This is the way to be spared. So obviously, Chacham made a b'roshai. We have to do what's practical and pragmatic. We have to take every precaution in the world possible. And therefore, anything that is a luxury, not a necessity, like going to restaurants or things like that, probably is not the best thing to do right now. I don't know. I don't want anybody to lose their business, so don't take it from me. Go to restaurants, but do takeout. Don't sit there. Maybe I don't know. But you have to decide what's a luxury, not a necessity. And we don't want anybody to lose a parnasa. So I don't know. I didn't say anything. We'll rewind, retract again until the Gedolim say that. But I'm saying, people go to malls and people congregate needlessly. If you're doing it for davening, as long as the Gedolim say we can still go to shul, it's okay. But to go places, stamazoi, just futile and just to loiter and just to hang out. Chasham, a Jew should never hang out anyhow. The Jew doesn't hang out. The Jews here to accomplish. Rabbi, so we're here to accomplish in this world. We have a limited time. We're now mamash facing the Mashiach. Every action causes a tremendous repercussion, tremendous reaction in the world. Every mitzvah we do now is considered to be huge. Every word of Torah that we learn, every tzedakah, give as much tzedakah, give liberally, dispense as much tzedakah as possible. This is not the time now to say, well, I don't know about the economy. This is the time now, tzedakah tatzim umavis. Tzedakahs, we have to be very, very, very careful to make sure to be loving and kind, to give as much tzedakah as possible, and the schus of Havas Yisrael, of loving every Jew, of taking care of one another. We should be sorry for Hashem that this decree, and it is a decree, should be averted. We should be spared of any Kadosh Baruch Hu Shmereinu v'Yatzleinu mikol tzara v'tzuka u'mikol nego machla v'yishlach bracha b'aslacha b'chol ma'aseh yadeinu. Amen.
Amen.